you think that I'm playing with semantics, and I'm probably going to play with semantics a little bit, because that's sometimes the best we have to work with. Maybe you want all those things to save you, and you sum them up in one word, and you call that word God. Is it? Is that what is God saving you? And if God is saving you from this thing that you are in danger of succumbing to, what does that mean? What does it mean to be saved by God and not all of these other things? Before I even get into a scripture today, I'll just say, and you can agree or disagree with me, but I think that the Spirit of Jesus, the risen Spirit of Jesus, like transforms our relationship to these things, to power, to money, to fame, and to strength, these things that we believe are going to save us. The denouement, which I'll define in the book of Esther, the denouement is like this distinctly modern part of narratives where the resolution is explained, all right? So it's where you get to like put all your messages and your propaganda and stuff like this. And this is what I'll get into is like this is a modern work of fiction is what the book of Esther is. It's not modern, but it's like it plays modern. But the book of Esther and the denouement, the way it goes down and the way it resolves, it could tell you, I'm just giving you the warning, like the caveat before we even jump in. Like I'm giving you the caveat that it could tell you, right, that power and fame and money and strength are the things that are not only worth desiring and worth obtaining, but are like righteous endeavors to try and obtain without God. I think it's really important to name what's dangerous about this book. And so I'm going to tell you first how it goes down, all right? How the whole story goes down. All right, the king of Persia, which is the occupier of Israel, is offended by his queen. He tries to get her to stand up and parade herself about all of his magistrates and governors and viceroys, and she will not do it with her crown on. And so she's one of my favorite characters in the story, and all she does is just not do what this guy tells her to do. But she's replaced with another queen, and again, all his magistrates and commissioners and viceroys conduct this search throughout the kingdom, and they find who they deem is the most beautiful maiden of all, right? And they invite all of the most beautiful from the kingdom in, and they assemble them, and they beautify them, and then they bring them before the king, and the king chooses Esther to be his new queen. Now, Esther is concealing the fact that she's Jewish, but she is. A plot to assassinate the king is revealed to Esther's guardian and cousin, Mordecai, when he's standing in the palace courtyard one day, and two eunuchs are talking about how they're going to kill the king, and Mordecai reveals that plot to assassinate the king to the king. So the king has replaced his queen with Esther. Meanwhile, her guardian is gaining favor with the king by telling him information that he needs to not be killed. Hey. Meanwhile, Mordecai dishonors this character, Haman, who's the second most powerful character the second most powerful governor in the empire, second to the king. He dishonors Haman by not standing when Haman comes through the palace courtyard. The king has given a decree that everybody is supposed to stand when Haman comes through the courtyard. Mordecai doesn't stand. I'm so glad Sarah Feldman is here today, actually. I was going to call you about this sermon, actually. We're talking about Esther.
Amazing, I love it.
Queen Esther. So Mordecai, offends Haman in the courtyard, doesn't stand, and then Mordecai decides that it's beneath him to just get retribution on... No, Haman decides it's beneath him to simply seek retribution on Mordecai. The decision he makes, the most reasonable, the most logical decision that he can make, is to annihilate all Jewish people. He persuades the king. It isn't difficult. It happens in less than a chapter, actually, the persuasion of the king. I mean, there is no conflict in that part of the story. The king is persuaded to annihilate the Jews. And here we have what's called a narrative predicament that Esther's in, right? Esther's in a predicament here. She is the queen. She is Jewish. They do not, the emperor does not know she's Jewish. And Mordecai tries to persuade her to approach the king as a mediator for her people. After some hesitation, she does. She enters into the chamber of the king uninvited, which is a transgression that's punishable by death. And in this cool moment, he takes his scepter and he extends it to her, and he to basically express the fact that he's not going to kill her. And she enters into his presence, and she acts as an intermediary for her people. They reveal that Haman is the bad guy attempting to do this thing to Esther and her people, who Esther reveals now that she's Jewish. They gain the affection of the king. Mordecai is promoted. Haman is executed, and they are given permission to kill. Which they do. They kill 75,000 people and commemorate the war with a feast. Now, does it go without saying, right, that genocide is bad? Technically, I think, yes, it does, but it doesn't mean we shouldn't say it, right? Like genocide is bad. It's the antithesis of grace. It's the antithesis of mercy. It's the antithesis of God. That's what I believe, and I can argue it with some semantics, but it's like genocide should be opposed with every power and every fiber of our being. And the book of Esther reflects that singular anxiety, that fear about extermination. It's a fear the Israelites have lived with for centuries. They still live with to this day. And the book of Esther is a response to that anxiety using fantasy and fiction. The book is not a statement of historical fact. And that's where I stopped first. It's a writer's fantasy, and it's a problematic fantasy. Not because Esther's the queen and Esther's the hero, even though she's a very passive hero in the story, I would have to say. Her action requires the most courage, the most devotion, and the most faith, but she gets rewarded the least. The book's not a statement of historical fact. It's a problematic fantasy. It's a short novel in the genre of historical or speculative fiction about an occupied nation and the orphan woman who saved them from genocide. And that part's not problematic, right? It's what the main characters do with that salvation state that stops me, however, right? This could be a story about the inevitabilities of war and God's faithfulness in battle, but it's not. One, God's name is never used in the book. God is never called upon. God is never encountered. God is never interacted with in the book of Esther. Not in the original version. Now, the wars in this story are all avoidable wars. The outcomes, which are good outcomes, the opposition of and overcoming of genocide and genocidal actors, the outcome, it could have been secured without any violence at all. That's what I'm trying to say. So why is it in the book? Why is it in the book? And how does it work? Is it okay that I'm just sort of like working through this book a little bit? It reminds me of Jonah in the sense that it fictionalizes from what's actual, right? Jonah takes events that are actual and then it creates fiction from it, like outstanding fiction, fiction that requires what's called your suspension of disbelief, like your ability to say, okay, this is happening even though it's not possible. Unlike Jonah, which fictionalizes from what's actual, the book of Esther, I think it's important to observe that it requires no suspension of disbelief. It's an attempt at realism before realism was a thing. It's speculative fiction in the disguise of historical truth, which makes it something that you should examine. I don't know what you should do. I think that you should examine it closely. I know I should examine it closely. It's a classically structured narrative. It has exposition, it has information, then it has conflict. That conflict is then acted upon by a main character. There's a resolution, and then in this one there's a denouement where, like I told y'all, the resolution is explained and all of the messages are given. It's the messages of this story that tend to be problematic in the denouement. It's not the resolution. Genocide is stopped. It's what do we do with the permission to kill? What do we do with the permission to kill? The denouement of Esther could exalt the supreme importance of political agency. It could emphasize the importance of the spoils over and above everything else, even though the writer of this story goes to great length to emphasize the fact that even though the armies of Israel, entered into a conflict with people and killed more than killed them and won the war, they took no spoils. They seized no plunder, as it's written. I mentioned that the original version of this story never mentions the name of God, which is to say, like the heroes in this story don't pray. Are you guys kind of understanding why this isn't really a book you can just like pick out a passage and say like, oh, look, that thing's absolutely true. Like, no, this is a full story. The heroes in this story don't pray. There are no explicit encounters with God. God's intervention is wholly implied in this story. And the only other book in the Bible that displays this convention is the Song of Solomon, which is another mystery in a different way. The outcomes of this story are invented outcomes. They are literally fantastical outcomes. I'm not saying that as a derogatory thing. Like they are the outcomes that were invented by a writer, that came from a writer's imagination. The end of this story is the ending that the writer wanted to happen. So how can it be trusted, man? Like, I ask myself again, why is this exceedingly problematic book in the Bible? And the question I finally reached that would make this sermon more than just me trying to figure out this book in order to give you kernels of wisdom is like the thing that I have to offer maybe is some answers about how it can help me become a better follower of Jesus. And that's what I want to be. Now, the mention of God in this book and the lack thereof, it's interpreted by many theologians. There are what I call the silver lining theologians who say that this convention is applied to imply that God's at work even when we don't depend on God. I can get down with that, I guess. The more skeptical theologians posit that the book's more problematic. It sees the Israel in this book as a political and not a spiritual entity. The story is presently, like in our world right now, being weaponized by these ultra-nationalist and Islamophobic actors to villainize Islam in general, and Iran in particular. They're ignoring the novel's most pressing anti-genocidal themes in favor of a reading that justifies Did I bring that water up here? It justifies war and violence. Thank you very much. And imperialism. And anytime the Bible is used to justify war and violence and imperialism, again, I feel like there's something asking me to stop and think. The name of God's not used in the book. It could be a sign that God is at work, even when we do not depend on God. It could be something more problematic and cultural. It could be both of those things at the same time. Both things can be true at once. What it is, and why I think I ended up getting tangled in the paradox of it, is it's an anti-genocidal story applied to do killing and xenophobia, right? So here we have a story that's about the fact that genocide is wrong, and the courage of a woman who gets lost in the narrative because the outcomes are not contingent upon her, except for her act of courage. The outcomes are contingent upon her, but the result of the outcomes do not affect her. The end of the story is not about her. It's about Mordecai's fame, for example. It's an anti-genocidal story applied to justify killing. So I focus on Esther, who wanted no one to die. The savior in the story is Esther. She's an orphan in exile. She has no political agency, and her charge is to approach the king and to implore his favor and to plead with him personally. And this is commonly referenced. Simpson sent me something recently. It's commonly referenced as an overlap with Jesus, but that doesn't work for me because the occupier in this case is Persia, which is modern-day Iran, and it was the richest and most powerful nation on the planet, and the occupier Israel. The intermediary is Esther, but it's the mercy of Xerxes, the king, and the mercy of the political institution he represents that Mordecai and Esther seek, right? They're always pleading with human power to subjugate the whims of human power, and they're doing it without God. This is a deep end of the pool that I think we have to dive into in Esther. Is they're pleading with human power to subjugate the whims of human power, and they're trying to do it without God. Is there a warning in that? I think that there is. It's not something that we can do. I know that my political activity, for example, will not save me. I also know that inactivity will not save me. To see Jesus overlapping with Esther is problematic because then you have to equate God with Haman. It's just not an easy enough overlap. The metaphor doesn't work. Falls apart. They plead with human power to subjugate the whims of human power, and they try to do it without God in this story, and they still get the outcome they want. But I know that Jesus would never enter into a collision with humans without depending fully on Abba. And that also makes the equation between Abba and Xerxes a false equivalency, right? You see, I think the wrong message to take away from this book is one about how political power is the ultimate answer and how it's that's going to save you. It doesn't mean, I'm not advertising that you shouldn't have it. There are many examples in history of good people not having it, though. I think the wrong message to take away from this book is one about how political power is not only the answer, but how it can be obtained without God's help. and how all of your agency and all of your celebrations are contingent upon the mercy of your enemies when they're in charge of the game. The wrongest way to interpret this book would be to say, it's about a mercy that's inherent to the game, one that doesn't exist. When we look out in the world, where people that have political agency are making choices that harm weak and vulnerable populations, and they're doing it with justifications that come from this book, man, that come from... You see, the godliest events of this story are clear to me. I'm not going to keep you too much longer in my... And I think that there actually can be encouraging to you. The emperor's sleepless night. The night that Xerxes wakes up suddenly after he's delivered the decree to annihilate all of the Jewish people and realizes that somebody prevented him from being assassinated that day. That salvific act of Mordecai could be interpreted as an act of God. He didn't make any decision to be in the palace courtyard that day. Another one of those godly events is the moment when the emperor extends his scepter to Esther, indicating that she'll not be executed for entering his chamber without being summoned. It means something to me, guys. It means to me that before and without power, money, fame, and strength, before and without power, money, fame, and strength, that God is putting literal things in my story where I have no control to advance a narrative that's not about me. That even before and without power, and before and without money, and before and without fame, before and without strength, that God is putting literal things in my story where I have no control to advance a narrative that's not about me alone. It's a little bit about me. What do we do with the permission to kill? Jesus said, you've heard it said, that you give an eye for an eye, that I tell you, if you love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. He tells you if you even feel the feeling of anger, that there is a sign somewhere that something is wrong. I go back into the story and I just think about the places where Jesus would have intervened and what Jesus would have done. Like, what would have Jesus told Mordecai the moment he just decided not to stand for Haman? Jesus is the most ironic figure in history because Jesus always has a secret that nobody else knows, and there's nothing better for a story than a secret. It's nothing better for irony than a secret. Jesus always has a secret, and he always treats power the same exact way. Not with reverence, not with deference, not with fear, not even with anxiety. Jesus treats power the same exact way. He looks at them and he smirks at them, and he looks at them like they are actors in a play that they don't know is going on. What would Jesus have done? And what would Jesus have said when Mordecai wouldn't stand? What would Jesus have said at the moment they were given the permission to kill? Furthermore, if Jesus is an omnipotent expression of God's power, like, what did Jesus do with the permission he had to kill? It's this work of realism that's completely paradoxical, that's in the Bible. It was the last to be canonized, and it's got me thinking about the difference between the fame of Mordecai and the fame of Jesus. The book ends, and there's a chapter, and it's titled The Fame of Mordecai. Mordecai gets all the medals. He gets all the money. He gets all of his enemy's property, all of the agency that you could ever want. And the fame of Jesus is the cross. The cross of Christ, the most absurd moment in human history, when we kill the creator of the universe, and they consent to be killed. I am thankful for the story of Esther. I'm thankful that it's here because it draws my attention to the original question that I asked before we even started this conversation, which is, are you in danger? Where's the danger coming from, and what's going to save you? Don't forget to depend upon God and love as if nobody is doomed. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit.